everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All of the ones that are very sharp off the mark with the timing. Nice to see you all. Happy to have you here. You have joined us for session 3 of the Association for Coaching Conference 360 Conference, which is all about diversity, equality and inclusion. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. First of all, if you could just pop a little hello in the chat, that would be perfect. Let us know who you are, where you are, what it is that you do. That would be amazing. Well, I hope you're all sat nice and comfortable, that you've got teas, coffees, you've got some snacks, because it's always good to have snacks when we're doing a little bit of learning. And just remember, if you like what we're talking about, then make sure you're telling everybody about it on social media using the hashtags, and make sure that you're popping stuff into the chat. If you've got observation comments, please do engage, and questions for the panel members, if you put them into the Q&A section, we'll pick those up for the Q&A section of today's session, and that will be taking place at 3:20. So we'll be getting to the questions there. Remember, if you love a question, vote it up so that we make sure that we ask for that one. So, given that it's now 2 o'clock, I will welcome our very first speaker onto the stage. Our first speaker is CEO and founder of Coach Bright. This is a charity that supports young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to become more independent and resilient so they can lead the lives that they want. So welcome to the stage, Robin Chew.
Thanks, Charlotte. Really appreciate it. I will do the obligatory thing, which is just ask if people can hear me. And while that's happening, I will share my screen as well. So would love it if someone could pop in the chat whether they can see the screen and can hear me, essentially. Yes, brilliant, fab. And I see Vicky Routledge is here, who's a good friend. How fun. How exciting, everyone. I'm really delighted to speak first at the diversity part of this conference. And what I'll be speaking about today is how we can take coaching, which is traditionally reserved for those kind of later on in their career, to those at the start of their career, and specifically to those in school and university and apprenticeships and recent graduates. To just set the scene and the framing for this, I'd love to hear from people. If you were to imagine yourself back at the wonderful age of 17, back when you were there, if you could put in the chat, if you felt comfortable to, kind of 3 words to describe what you were like when you were 17. 3 words to describe what you were like when you were 17. And also, if you were feeling brave, 3 qualities, skills that helped you succeed in the workplace, but maybe put in brackets, you know, workplace or something, so that it's clear that that refers to that. I've got some brilliant ones coming in already. Carefree, adventurous, moody, says Valeria. Elka says broken, lost and shy. I'm with you, I was the same. Shy comes up again with Emma, in insecure and happy as well. Brilliant. Let's keep them coming. Really, really interesting. We're going to come back to this. So 3 words to describe what you were like when you were 17. And if you could as well, kind of 3 qualities or skills that helped you succeed in the workplace, I guess beyond when you were 17, you know, later in the workplace, and maybe put in brackets kind of workplace in that as well. We're going to come back and kind of and touch on that. So I'm Robin, I'm the CEO and founder of Coach Bright. I thought I'd just very quickly kind of introduce what Coach Bright is about and how this kind of fits into why I'm here. And to do that, I thought I'd share one of my favourite photos at Coach Bright, and also one of the favourite young people that we supported throughout our time as a charity. And that's Esther, who's here on the left-hand side. In this photo, she's in year 12 and she was 17. She was one of the first pupils that we supported back when Coach Bright started. And for those of you who kind of remember secondary school or 6th form, she's one of those pupils that has kind of boundless energy. And I remember the first time I met her, she came kind of running down the corridor and was like, "Oh, you're here from Coach Bright, aren't you? Yeah, my teachers have told me about you. You're here from Coach Bright. I'm really excited that you guys are here. You're going to coach me, right?" And I was like, yeah, totally. And I said that. And then Esther was like, yeah, I'm so glad you're here. Because I really want to go on to university. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go on to university. And I was like, yeah, great, cool, Esther. That's amazing. And then she was like, yeah, I'm going to go on to university. I'm going to do that. I'm going to then graduate, and then I'm going to become a management consultant, and I'm going to do that. I was like, yeah, I mean, that's amazing, Esther. I mean, management consultancy, I still don't really know what that is, but I'm glad you do at the age of 17. And then she says that, and she's like, I'm going to go to university, I'm going to become a consultant, and then I'm going to earn loads of money to support my mum and my younger sister. And you're like, yeah, that's incredible. And she says all that. Esther is also a pupil from a disadvantaged background. So throughout her secondary and primary school, she was in receipt of free school meals. And all the national statistics say that a pupil like Esther, a pupil from a disadvantaged background, is far less likely to go on to university and far less likely to go on to what the Sutton Trust call kind of, I don't know, leading professions that have status and influence in society, such as being a consultant. And far more likely to not pass their GCSEs and far more likely to not move up the kind of social mobility ladder. And still now in 2021, there is a postcode lottery in this country. So the background that you're born into, what your parents do, have one of the biggest, if not the biggest, determinants on your own kind of lifetime earnings, your own quality of life, and obviously really apt right now during COVID, how long you live as well. And at the heart of Coach Bright, we're a social mobility and coaching charity, and our focus is about helping young people like Esther become more independent, more resilient, so that they can go on to do whatever it is they want to do. And the way that we want to do that, the way that we've been doing that over the last few years, is through a coaching approach, is through taking this incredible thing of coaching, which exists in the kind of commercial and corporate world, and applying it to young people at school level, at university level, and increasingly for young professionals who are just entering the workplace. So our new strategy is focused on coaching the whole child over the whole life cycle. So helping a young person like Esther not only kind of get into university, but thrive there, and then also not only get into the workplace, but thrive there as well. And what's really exciting is we've done this work for a bit of time now. And what we've realized is if we get a bit lucky and things go well, really exciting things can happen. So Esther last year graduated from the University of Manchester. She was the first in her family to go to university, and is currently now actually working full time at the University of Manchester as an employability officer. I just wanted to say that before I kind of get into the why we should kind of go younger when it comes to coaching, because I think important to say that this sort of work can have a really transformative impact on the individuals that we can serve. And for context, we kind of work with kind of 4,000 young people in these kind of various demographics kind of up and down the country. So that's kind of Coach Bright. And this talk is going to focus on why we should go younger and why we should not just focus kind of coaching on kind of senior leaders. With that in mind, though, we are going to start with some challenges. And also with that in mind, important to say that as with all great coaching, I definitely don't have the answers. This is just a sense of kind of the challenges and what we think the kind of suggestions for kind of moving forward is, but would welcome thoughts in the kind of Q&A later or in the chat as well as we're going along. So the kind of challenges of going younger and supporting young people at the start of their careers or even younger when they're at school. And I thought I'd frame this with the quote, with one of my favorite quotes during my own kind of coaching training, which is from the kind of coactive coaching part, where there's this lovely quote that talks about the coachee is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And that's a kind of fundamental principle that us as coaches can hold. And I was wrestling with that for quite a while, especially with the demographic that we have at Coach Bright. Especially the point about being whole. The coach is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And then I was reading these papers, and I'm not a neuroscientist or anything, but I was reading these papers about the kind of brain doesn't fully mature or develop until the age of 25. That you're kind of prefrontal cortex, the bit that kind of governs your emotions and how you feel about things and how impulsive you are and your ability to plan and organize, that isn't at kind of full maturity until the age of 25. So this idea of, you know, coming as a whole person, you're like, oh gosh, does that apply when you're a young person? Like, how does that fit into this conversation? And how does that fit in? You know, I'm sure there's plenty of kind of parents in the room. How does that fit in when we know, especially for teenagers and those in their kind of early 20s, they have such a deep sense of feeling, such a deep sense of, oh gosh, I'm studying for these exams, or I've just had a breakup, and there's a real sense of kind of lack of perspective. And how does that kind of affect coaching, and is coaching the kind of right intervention in this kind of age range? So I'm just going to leave that there as something that we're going to think about a bit later. So the brain not being kind of fully developed, or does that mean that our coachees aren't whole by nature? And the second is this idea of the coachee is naturally resourceful. And this is a kind of unique Coachbright problem of, you know, we've specifically chosen to support young people from low income backgrounds in the UK. And we know that for those individuals that there are significant structural challenges when it comes to not having enough kind of food and water, if it's at kind of school, or even the Navigating the Labyrinth is a report from the civil service where it details that the civil service is structurally unfair for those from kind of disadvantaged backgrounds, that it serves those from more middle class and affluent communities. And then this 1 in 5 quote is from the Deloitte Millennial Survey, where 1 in 5 people said, millennials and Generation Z said that they feel personally discriminated against all the time or frequently because of their background, or because of an aspect of their backgrounds. So we also know that there are big kind of structural challenges. So with that in mind, are our coachees kind of resourceful with that kind of context? Like, you know, are our kind of 15, 16-year-olds who are in receipt of free school meals, you know, should coaching be the focus for them? Which, you know, if we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is, you know, sometimes I think about coaching as kind of that top bit, self-actualization and esteem, and you're like, should we be focusing on safety and food and water, and how does that fit in? So we've got this challenge of, God, are these like fully formed, fully developed individuals, but then actually also there are institutional and structural barriers, and therefore is coaching enough, and is it the right intervention? So that's another challenge that we'll come back to. And then the third is undoubtedly that, you know, those starting in the world of work, they need to learn technical skills. You know, you see most grad schemes will have accountancy exams, legal exams, things that individuals will need to pass and learn and be ready for the world of work. So with all that focus, God, how can we add in, and, you know, there's crazy thing of coaching, of kind of, you know, personalized conversation that, you know, we don't have the capacity and the time to do that. So that's the kind of state of play, I think, of coaching for young people in terms of the challenges. You've got, are they fully developed individuals? There are bigger, more structural challenges at play if we genuinely want to help this generation succeed. And also there are loads of really important technical skills that individuals need to have and to learn. So why are we going to go for coaching? Like, why are we going to go down this path? And again, this isn't fully formed, so I'd love kind of thoughts that people had. But in our sense at Coachbright, what we believe is that to go younger, a big reason is the thing, and, you know, I'm sure many people intuitively, as they listen to this talk, have kind of already recognized this, is we know that through the comments in the chat, we know that through the work that people have gone through, that what makes people succeed at work is those softer skills. And those softer skills can be generated and informed and powered by having a executive coach talk you through and guide you kind of through your process. And and the kind of CBI called it kind of soft skills aren't soft, they're essential skills needed to succeed in the world of work. And I stole this kind of graphic from them, which I thought was brilliant, you know, stuff around kind of grit and resilience and self-regulation, self-management, self-efficacy, all the things that if we can do it, if we can do that while in the world of work, if we can demonstrate empathy, if we can demonstrate self-awareness, if we can demonstrate compassion and emotional regulation when we're stuck on a problem, those are the things that we know kind of helps individuals succeed in the world of work. And coaching definitively has a part to play in that, and definitively has a part to play in that when we go younger. And this is what we found at CoachBright in our kind of early work, which is when done right, it can work. When done right, we know that coaching can help individuals stay more motivated in school. We know that it can help people kind of navigate, you know, a really confusing workplace and what that means. And really excitingly, we conducted an independent evaluation of our work from an organization, a research organization called Impact Ed. And they found that our coaching helped our young people's resilience improve, and that was considered kind of statistically significant. And really excitingly, because our schoolwork does touch on kind of academic performance a bit, is through a coaching approach, not a tutoring approach, not a different approach, through a coaching approach, an approach that focused on helping the individual figure out the answer for themselves, through an approach that gave an individual plenty of time and space, and they were treated with compassion and felt safe to talk about their challenges. CoachBright pupils improved in their subject grade by nearly half of a grade more than those that weren't coached from kind of similar backgrounds. And that's really exciting, because I think it proves to a degree that coaching can have that effect on not only kind of, you know, what we might call kind of softer skills, but also in the stuff that people, you know, call kind of, you know, hardcore grades or kind of job performance. And so early work is showing that, you know, coaching has a role here. And this is just some of the things that people have kind of come out and said when it comes to coaching and getting a coach at CoachBright. And these will be familiar to most people, that coaching has given me an ability to identify my purpose, or to understand what my strengths are as an individual. I really like the fact that it's personalized and it's not just someone giving me the answer, but I genuinely get to talk and feel heard and listen to. And also I feel really safe, and I feel a sense of agency and power. You know, all these things obviously don't just apply to young people, but apply kind of way beyond. But I think what's really exciting is, imagine a world where we did that at the start of individuals' careers, rather than, you know, when they're thinking about career changing or when they're at a kind of senior leadership position. What would the world look like if we helped individuals really understand at the start of their careers, actually, what are my values? What do I really care about? What really matters to me? And also kind of giving individuals the space and the time to really explore that. We already know, right, that millennials and Gen Zs are far more introspective, far more reflective than previous generations. But we also know that comes with a high degree of toxicity in this kind of always switched on 24/7 technology culture that we live in, that without a coach kind of really providing that facilitation to guide an individual through that process, where they're not just stuck in kind of consistent kind of self-talk mode, that introspection can be quite dangerous. So imagine a world where coaching not only existed for leaders, but existed for those at the start, and the power that can have in giving individuals kind of agency and strength. And I've been frantically trying to read and slightly ignore the chat while this is happening, but I think there's been some brilliant comments, especially this last one from Matthew, about helping individuals see themselves not as victims and stuff like that. I think brilliant. Would love more to kind of more comments, and I can read through those in a minute. So I think coaching definitely has a role to play here. definitely has a role to play, not only for older generations, but younger. And I think as a cohort, we can play a significant role in democratizing coaching so that it not only exists for those at the kind of top, but also exists for those kind of from more kind of underrepresented backgrounds. And that's kind of at the heart of the journey that we're on at Coach Bright so far. In terms of kind of how we do that, important to note that on that point around, is coaching suitable for those that don't quite have the resource? This is our kind of one of our theories. It's called the Continuum of Help, and it was developed by a coach called Ian Henderson. And essentially, the idea is that help is across this continuum, but at Coach Bright, we kind of default to coaching because that's where we think we can build the most amount of independence for an individual. But as we know that if an individual really doesn't have the answer, or if an individual really is stuck, then we can move further down the continuum towards advising, towards showing. And that's how we kind of adapt some of our practices so that it's not just pure coaching for this group of people. I've seen Charlotte has just magically appeared, indicating there's no time left. So with that in mind, I just wanted to say a big thank you. I'm obviously going to be around for the Q&A, and like I love all the comments that have come through. I'll be taking loads of notes during, and like really excited to get to chat some more. So thank you for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Robin. And the comments are great. I think lots of people really resonating with the work that you do. And I certainly know that the teenage me would have really valued the wisdom of a coach in the space to think, because my teenage brain couldn't do it by itself. So it's great work, and can really see the benefits there about how that enables people, especially with perishable skills and things like that, which is kind of what we're taught in school. So some great, I just love how many different ways you make a difference to the next generation of leaders. So thank you so much for that. Okay, if I can ask you to stop sharing your screen. Lovely. All right, so I'd love to welcome to the stage our next speaker. She is an award-winning career coach, author and leadership trainer, and all of her work is focused around the masses of experience she has in coaching women in leader and ethnically diverse leaders to progress in the world of work. So welcome to the stage, Jenny Garrett, OBE.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here and wonderful to see what an amazing audience you have. I was reading all the comments and really excited to see the engagement. So thank you so much for inviting me here today to talk about getting to 50-50, how coaching can actually help. And in this very short session, the sorts of things I'm going to cover is helping you think as a coach about what is your role in helping organizations gain gender balance. When I'm talking about 50-50, I'm talking about 50% male, 50% female. And we know we've got a lot of work to do on that. And I imagine lots of you coach women, because often women will put their hand up for coaching, not to say men don't as well. So what's our role in helping gender balance? What might our blind spots be? What might our assumptions be? And what work might we have to do on ourselves in order to move this forward? I'm very conscious of the fact that the world is changing at a huge rate, and maybe we shouldn't be using the word gender, we should be using the word sex, because we're talking about the biological sex of the person as they were born, or are we talking about their gender expression? Are we talking about the fact that they have to identify as a woman as opposed to being born a woman? So I just wanted to bring that into the picture to be really clear that you might be coaching clients who now identify as a woman, as opposed to clients who were born biologically as a woman. And there are different ways of looking at our identity and expressing that. But ultimately, I'm talking about anyone who is born as a woman, anyone who identifies as a woman, and thinking about the challenges that they might experience in today's workplace. So the Fawcett Society, who do a lot of work around gender balance and advocate for women and empower them to move forward in their lives and their work, have done a very recent survey called Sex and Power. And it can be really easy to think that the work's done when it comes to women and advancing in the workplace. There has been a lot of emphasis that if there's any small change in any of the stats, you'll see it all comes up and wow, we have one more woman in the FTSE 250 board. So the world has changed when we know that one woman goes and we go back to exactly where we were before. But I think the stats are interesting. You know, women remain just 8% of FTSE 100 CEOs, and there are no women of colour. Less than a third of the UK's top jobs are filled by women. And I think for me, this idea about the intersection of our identities is important, because we can talk about women. And when I started doing this work, I had written a book called Rocking Your Role, which was a guide to success for female breadwinners. And I was going into corporate organizations, talking about my book, talking about the findings and how women who are the main earner in their home cope with work and life. And I would see a sea of faces, and the sea of faces would be mostly white middle-class women. And actually, when we look at the coaching field, we often see a sea of white middle-class women. And there's nothing wrong with white middle-class women. I'm not, you know, there's no issue, but where is the diversity? And what do we understand about the intersection of our identities? Often people think about areas of disadvantage or underrepresentation. And me sitting here, I'm a woman and I'm a Black woman. So there are two things that could potentially get in my way and disadvantage me in some way. But 1 + 1 in these situations doesn't equal 2. In fact, disadvantage, bias, discrimination is compounded when there are additional areas of identity that could be disadvantaged. So I really like the fact that when we're talking about sex and power, and when you're thinking about coaching women, it's really important for you to consider what else. Is it their working class background? Does that compound the challenges they might experience? Do they have a disability? You know, what else could be compounding their experience in the workplace and making it challenging? Because there's definitely a bias against women, and sometimes from other women. So we do have to look at that. But there may be other dimensions that we have to consider. And this is today. I just want to really reiterate the urgency of it all. This is today. This isn't 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. We still have those challenges. And the fact that we've just been through COVID-19, still in it actually, through this global pandemic has been a real challenge for women. Homeschooling really set women back. The fact that women are working from home could sound like an advantage, but often that meant that they also ended up doing the lioness's share of the housework as well. So there were many challenges that the global pandemic has created. Caring for young children, caring for elderly relatives, expecting to be a supportive person, and ultimately for many women holding down a full-time job plus caring roles as well, plus homemaker roles. So all of those additions making it really hard then to be moved forward in the workplace. And it's not to say that men are great, and a lot of men do take on household responsibilities, do share the work. Even I've come across couples where they both went part-time during the pandemic, so they could both be doing some homeschooling and also be working. But ultimately, a lot of this does fall on the shoulders of women. And these are important things to be considering when you're coaching your clients. We, as coaches, I think we want to empower, we want people to feel resourceful. Sometimes I think we cannot acknowledge that there may be some barriers that truly exist that will stand in the way, whether that's around society, very much fitting in with what Robin was saying, societal issues, whether they're your personal barriers, whether they're organizational barriers. So this just thinking about some of the things that might come up when you're having your coaching sessions, the feedback that your female clients might have received. Stop being so emotional when they're being passionate. For a Black woman, often being called angry and aggressive, again, when being passionate. Alluding to work not being the most important thing for a woman, because perhaps you work part-time and have caring responsibilities, or perhaps you're married, and so why should what you do at work matter so much? These still leak out in the workplace, depending on who is at the top of the organization. But what we know from the data is that typically at the organization in the UK are white men who may have sometimes some narrow views and some old views about what it means to be a woman in the workplace and what you might be experiencing. So I have a question for you. How many times more often do men interrupt women than other men? Type in the chat and let me know. What do you think? Is it equal? Is it 2 times? Is it 3 times? Right. So 100% more, 30%, two times, 10 times, 4 times, 3 times, at least twice. I think the acknowledgement from the chat is telling me that you definitely know it happens more often for women. Absolutely. It happens 3 times more often. So another question for you. In a study of performance reviews, where a percentage of women receive negative feedback on their personal style, such as you can sometimes be abrasive, what percentage of men receive the same sort of feedback? So feedback on their personal style. Again, give me some answers. None. Oh yeah, 0, 60-20. Again, a really clear acknowledgement from you that there would be a difference, however much that would be. Yeah, so 66% of women and only 1% of men got feedback on their personal style. Really interesting. Another question, compared to straight men, how much more likely are lesbian and bisexual women to feel like they can't talk to colleagues about their lives outside of work? 10 times, we're getting 10, 20 times, 7 times. Yeah. So again, a little bit, you're guessing a little bit higher, most of you, than it is, but around 4 times. So imagine that, going to work, feeling that you cannot talk about anything that happened at the weekend, in case you mention that your partner is the same sex as you, and not knowing how your colleagues will react to that, or if there'll be consequences or implications for your career. Another one, what percentage of Black women have never had an informal interaction with a senior leader at their company? I'm glad you find the stats enlightening, John. Yeah, so we've got, again, far too high. I like that. Again, some very high percentages here, 59%. Now, we know that to get ahead in UK companies, you need a sponsor, you need an advocate, you need someone in your corner. If you've never had an informal interaction with the senior leader, how are you going to get that? Yes, you can shine in meeting settings and informal settings, but those informal conversations that lead to someone really advocating for you might not be happening. So as coaches, what can we do? Well, I think sometimes we need to challenge. When you're being called in to coach someone because of their abrasive style and they are a Black woman, what else can we do to explore that before we go straight into those objectives? In that 3-way conversation you might have with their line manager and themselves, what can we do to unpack the fact that perhaps there might be some bias here? Absolutely, the person might be abrasive, but what else might be going on? So it's really interesting for us to think about the role of challenging coaching. Of course, we must support and empower and encourage and be curious, all of those things. But when we think about, if we're thinking about helping get to 50-50 gender balance, then perhaps challenge comes in many different ways. It might be challenging the organization, challenging your coachee to ask for more constructive feedback that's really helpful. It might be helping them to challenge the fact that their male colleagues don't get that same feedback. It might be challenging them to think differently about why they're perhaps getting negative feedback or being held back, and recognizing that gender may play a role within it. It may not, but I think if it's not in our mindset, and if we don't even consider helping our client explore that area, then we might be missing a trick. The context, of course, is very important. How safe does your client feel, not just with you in this coaching session, but are they psychologically safe in their organization? A really important question to understand, because if we want to encourage them to challenge, if they don't feel safe to do so, if this environment is not a place where they can make mistakes or air their feelings or be authentic, then we have to consider how else they might be able to help themselves. And maybe it's important to name it sometimes. You know, I think definitely when it comes to any of the protected characteristics, we're talking about race, ethnicity, we're talking about gender, we're talking about disability, it can be important, I think, to name these things at the start, to talk about, you know, how do you think being a woman impacts where you are today? Because I think then what you're doing is you're creating space in the conversation for the person to bring this into the conversation. They might say, you know what, being a woman doesn't matter to me. I think everyone's equally successful. It's about me working hard. That's fine. Or they might say, you know, there are some things that have been a challenge for me. Whatever they say is fine. But it's really important to create the space to bring that into the conversation. So that naming it, that actually, what is it? What can we talk about everything we want to that is anchored on your career and makes a difference for you here? I am, as a coach, I'm open to that. Because inadvertently, we can close down a conversation. We can close down bits of a person through the way what we've decided belongs in the conversation. And I know we don't want to get into therapy, you know, we have to know our boundaries. But I definitely had an experience many years ago that I was sharing earlier in the week, that I was explaining to my coach at the time, many, many years ago, that I received an opportunity, and it was because I was a Black woman. And I remember him saying, let's not go there, let's keep it positive. And it was positive. Yeah. So be careful that you don't have negative associations with characteristics and parts of the person's identity, which will mean that they're not able to bring it to the conversation. And of course, there may be differences between you and the person, but also remembering the commonalities. So accepting the difference, which might be gender, it might be ethnicity, it might be something else, accepting those differences because everyone's unique, but also really making sure that you've talked about the similarities and the commonalities as well. Everyone's lived experience is different, but there'll be some connection that I can find with you. So I've got a few different scenarios here, and I think I've probably only got about 3 minutes, but so let's just work on number one. I'd love to hear your perspective. Your coachee continually schedules virtual team meetings at an hour when their female colleague has blocked off time in their calendar to care for her young children and complains that she doesn't attend. You know, what kind of coaching question might you ask that person? I'd love to hear. What I'll do in terms of the research, a lot of it comes from Lean In, but I do have a reference sheet actually. I don't know if anything is getting posted out afterwards, but if not, it's all from Lean In research that was done. So hopefully that will help. What would you feel about that? Do you vary times for these calls? It would depend on how they told me this, absolutely. What would your colleague say to you if she was listening to you say this. That's a lovely one. Yeah, what alternative times might better serve all? What do you think's going on? Yeah, and I think it's really trying to help someone see things from someone else's perspective, really develop their empathy. You know, he will never have walked in that person's shoes, so it is difficult for him to have that strong sense of empathy about what might be happening here. And I think one of the big things that we need to do as coaches is think about how can we help others develop empathy for others' experience, so that they think differently about the way in which they're making their decisions, they consider others, and they understand how they might be being exclusive in the way that they're doing things. Wonderful. So you've got some really great ideas. You have those questions based on the fact that you have an understanding that women's experience might be quite different. And there are a couple here. Maybe take a quick picture of that slide because we've only got a minute left, and think about those. Think about that knowledge around bias now, and what is really happening for women in today's workforce might inform your questions just to help your clients question and think differently about what they're doing, whether they're female or whether they are male. So thank you so much for your time and your attention today. I hope this gave you some food for thought around helping organizations get to 50-50, helping your clients really consider what might be going on, getting to the bottom of that so you can change things. My name's Jenny Garrett. As you know, you can find me at jennygarrett.global. My work is about really supporting women and ethnically diverse leaders to achieve and helping their leaders create inclusive environments. I also have a directory of coaches from Black, Asian and minority backgrounds working at the most senior levels, which I welcome people to join. And also, like Robin, I have a social enterprise called Rocking Your Teens to inspire teens at the age of 13 to 14 and increase their aspirations. Thanks for your time, and I really look forward to the Q&A later.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jenny. And even making me think, just because I'm a woman, I kind of assume that I'm on the same page with everybody else, but am I holding that space for conversations that I haven't experienced those scenarios? So some great, getting my brain cells thinking about how can I serve my clients better and just create that space for conversation. Thank you so much. So another great session, and we're going straight into another fabulous session. So our next speaker is a neurodiverse coach and relationship whisperer. As a neurodivergent herself, she connects with her clients intuitively. Her mission is to empower other neurodivergent adults and their families to live a life of happiness, fulfillment, and success. So please welcome to our virtual stage, Kanan Teckchandani. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Charlotte. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you here. I'll just start by saying that today my intention is to open a door into the world of neurodiversity. It's been a hidden world, and even though I'm neurodivergent, I only really recently discovered so much about myself through parenting my son, and I just want to be able to share these insights with you so you don't have to waste more time researching, going down rabbit holes like I did. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. So this is a bit cringy, but this is a picture of me when I was younger. This was me when I was masking really badly. So what people on the outside would see was, oh, this is a girl who's bright, she works really hard, she's well behaved, quiet, shy, but people generally said she can do anything she wants to if she puts her mind to it. Inside, I was permanently feeling confused, anxious. I wanted to hide or run away from people and just be on my own. Sometimes I couldn't speak, I'd just become mute. So my internal dialogue would be, what's wrong with me? And I just didn't know what it was. No one could tell me, and I didn't want to speak to anyone about it. So I only really grew up thinking about autism and ADHD based on stereotypes that were around at that time. For me, ADHD was something that young kids had, boys mainly, and they looked like they were very hyperactive, maybe very loud. They would maybe look really bored in class or be disruptive. And that I couldn't relate to. Autism, also I had this stereotype of Rain Man. I don't know if many of you had the same experience growing up, but that's the only thing I knew about autism, that it was about not being able to make eye contact, not being able to communicate. It might look like a child who lines things up like cars and toys. So none of this I could relate to, and I didn't look into any of that. But over the years, I'm now 45, and I got diagnosed about 2 years ago. My son got diagnosed about 5 years ago, and we knew from a very young age that there was something going on, but we didn't know what it was. So I had to really go down this rabbit hole myself. And whenever I'm brought up that something might be ADHD or autism, I'd be told things like, no, he's too smart, he's too bright, he's too good at talking, he's too social. And this disbelief and invalidation was really hard because you just feel completely unsupported. So what I want to share with you today is that it is a hidden disability. It might not look like much on the outside. You might not be able to see any challenges, but there are lots of internal challenges going on. So this image here, which shows all the spectrum of things that can affect us, such as sensory, eye contact, social, so many different things that can affect us. And all people on the autistic spectrum are different. We're all unique, just as anyone is. So it's important to know that it's difficult to kind of diagnose and identify, and that's one of the problems. And because it's seen as something negative, people don't really want to look into it generally. They want to avoid it. And that's the problem. That's what I want to do today, which is change the stigma and open a new perspective so that people are more open to looking into this, because it's not a negative thing. It can be a really positive thing. It's really looking at anyone's strengths and elevating them. And as coaches, that's what we try to do. We look at people's strengths and we try to elevate them and help them reach their potential. And we look at their challenges and we try to help them overcome it and scaffold around those things. So it's not really any different, but just wanting to give you this inside kind of knowledge so that you can understand how we experience things. So some of the labels and language that you might come across in the neurodiverse world, we have neurotypical. So neurotypical is what most brains are like. Most people's brain has developed and functioned the same way. These are neurotypicals, the majority. And then outside of this majority, you have neurodivergence. So brains that are developed and are wired differently. So it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, it's just a difference, like anything, like gender, like culture. And that's what we mean by neurodiversity. It's just a natural variation, a difference. And it's all useful and adds to humanity. Neurodiverse means we have a mixture of different brain types. So within these, some terms that you might hear are autism, ADHD, highly sensitive person, gifted, twice exceptional, dyslexia. So this is not the full list. There's many more, but I'm just going to focus on autism, ADHD, and dyslexia today. So within autism, there are this spectrum, and you can hear things like Asperger's, which is when someone may be, they have average or above average intelligence. So they may be really good at masking. PDA, again, it's pathological demand avoidance. And then you have the terms autistic spectrum condition, which is more preferable, in my opinion, to autistic spectrum disorder. Because in my opinion, it's not all about being a disorder, it's just a difference. Within ADHD, it's not necessarily that everyone is hyperactive, particularly in recent years, women have become, have got diagnosed more and more because it's been noticed that they don't have necessarily the hyperactive aspect, they have this inattentive aspect, which may mean they look forgetful, they may look disorganized, they may be late for appointments. So the hyperactivity is not always necessarily there. So I'm going to go through to the next slide now. So what can it look like from the outside for other people? Well, it can look like anxiety or depression, because often we get misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression because the signs are missed. It can just look like someone who's overwhelmed with doing adulting things like cooking, cleaning, managing a household, managing paperwork. It can be someone who's deemed too emotional or too sensitive and overreacting to things. It can look like someone who's very cluttered and disorganized or scatterbrained, someone who's late for appointments. It could also be someone who doesn't like socializing, or it could be someone that does like socializing, but people find them too much or just a bit different. Some of the problems that people I work with, that I come across, is having addictions such as binge eating, relying on alcohol to self-soothe them from their problems, tech addiction. Often there's sleep problems, going to bed very late, having broken sleep. And the one which always is kind of my, the main thing that I try to help people with is these broken relationships, because often it's how they feel about themselves and then how they interact with other people that leads to this lack of connection and long-lasting relationships. So you might look at this and you might say, well, you know, lots of people have these things. Yes, that's true. But for someone who's neurodivergent, they may experience it much more of the time and at much more of an extreme level. So you may meet someone and they think differently, they behave differently. You may hear words such as quirky, weird, awkward, or too much. So that's what it can look like on the outside. We have the phrase double empathy, which is a problem in terms of communication. So people who are autistic, for example, they say that we have social communication problems, that it's challenging for us. And yet when you put someone who is autistic with another autistic, quite often they can communicate perfectly fine. There's no problem. And when you put a neurotypical with a neurotypical person, quite often they can communicate fine. So the double empathy problem is that when you put a neurotypical person with a neurodivergent person, an autistic person, that they just don't get each other. It's like they speak different languages. So what's the solution? Most of the time, we expect the autistic person to fit into the neurotypical world, to learn how to communicate. And yet, how would it look if neurotypicals learned the language and accommodated for us? The world would look quite different, I think. So the other thing that we need to consider are strengths and gifts, because it's not all about challenges. So when you look at someone's potential, who is neurodivergent, whose brain is wired different, often what I find is they are out of the box thinkers and they are innovators. They're really great at solving problems that other people might not be able to. We have ones that are very creative. A lot of people I've worked with are writers, they're designers, artists, entrepreneurs, and often in marketing actually as well. We sometimes have those that have very detailed, in-depth knowledge because of this ability to hyper-focus, which is to really spend time and funnel into our favorite topic and interest to a depth which most other people probably wouldn't, because it can be really exhausting. When we hyper-focus, we can lose track of time, we can forget to eat, we can forget to take care of ourselves, forget to go to the toilet. So hyper-focus is great if you want someone to learn something in depth and really quickly. And this ability that we have means that we know a lot about our specialist subject. So that means that we can also have exacting standards because we know so much. And that it can be very helpful in life, but also it can be a problem. You know, sometimes people can't meet our standards. So we have to be aware of that. Neurodivergents are often very resilient and determined because we've grown up without having the support that we needed as a child. So we've struggled and we've worked hard to make sure that we fit in, that we do well, that we do what's expected. So with that comes a lot of good qualities within us. And the other thing that I really want to point out is that basically most of the people I work with, they are so kind and compassionate. They really are. You know, when people say that autistic people are not empathetic, I say that's a myth. It's actually more the opposite. There's so much empathy that sometimes we have to protect ourselves, and we may appear not to be empathetic, but often at the depth of it, there is a lot of empathy there. So this is not to say that everyone who is neurodivergent has these strengths and gifts, but it's just something to consider when you meet an individual. So as I said at the beginning, my hope is to change the perception of neurodiversity and create more positivity around it. The old stigma, the old stereotype didn't work for me and didn't work for my family. So now I choose to try and create new role models and create awareness that, you know what, there's lots of successful people out there that you know that you can use to inspire your clients, or maybe even your family, people you know, friends. So this slide shows autistics that have been diagnosed recently, or even, you know, Einstein, he wouldn't have been diagnosed, but a lot of his behaviors and traits, they fall into the autistic spectrum. So you may have seen Melanie Sykes and Elon Musk come out this year, and that's great because it's just changing the perception again. These are people who are diagnosed with ADHD. So these are all people that I love, and it makes me so happy to see that they speak up about ADHD. They're all creatives, they are successful, they think differently, they inspire us, they educate us, they are entertaining. So what's not to like, right? And yet for example, in a school system, so many of these traits are seen as not helpful, and they're suppressed. And that's a real shame. And this is why we have so many mental health problems with our children in school, and also with adults that have gone through life thinking that there's something wrong with them, or that their nature is not okay, that they need to fit in. We need to break these constrictions and allow people to be themselves, because when they're themselves and they can blossom into their gifts, it's amazing what we can do. This page shows dyslexics. So you have famous entrepreneurs, actresses and actors. Richard Branson, you know, he's very famous for setting up businesses, having failed businesses, and then just starting again, and he just didn't give up, he kept going. So he's a real inspiration for me and my family, and I'm sure for lots of other people out there. He teaches us so much about resilience and thinking differently. So if we can look at these people, and our children can look at them and say, wow, this is what's possible, as opposed to what we're often told these days when we go to a clinical professional, that it's a disorder, that, you know, that you have these challenges that are going to be with you for life. It really drags us down. It makes us feel that we're not good enough. And I don't think that's appropriate. And so as coaches, you have this opportunity to raise awareness about a different paradigm for us, that this can be a strength, this can be a superpower. This is what my son said to me yesterday. He said, you know, it's really terrible sometimes being different, but you've helped me to turn it into a superpower. All we need is someone who believes in us and accepts us for who we are, and elevates those parts of us that can make a difference to humanity, that can change the world, because that's what is possible if we are supported. So some tips I wanted to give you in terms of how you can help clients that come to you that either are suspecting they are neurodivergent, or that you may be suspecting are neurodivergent, but they have not spoken about it. Something that we often need is a safe space to unmask ourselves and be our true selves. So that can be in the form of the environment, because often, especially with autistic people and highly sensitive people, the environment has a massive impact on us. if it's too noisy, or there's funny smells, or the lighting is too bright. That can affect how present we are and how well we can engage in the coaching process. So that's something to think about, the environment that you're creating and inviting them into. It also includes your physiology, your body language. Are you making it safe? Are you making it comfortable for them? You know, these subtle cues are things that we can pick up on, because often when we're on high alert, we notice things that don't feel right. So managing yourself and your sense of being a safe space for that person is really important. Language. Are you being clear, or are you implying things using slang or jokes? Because autistic people don't necessarily understand these things. On the other hand, it may be that if you're working with someone with a fast-moving brain, they might need you to go faster. They might need you to engage in a different way. Humor is really important sometimes. And when you identify someone's passions and special interests, that can really help you, because when we are hyper-focused on these things, we'll do anything to get there, right? We'll do anything to spend time in that place. So if you can help link someone's goals and rewards to their passion, you're going to help them move forward a lot quicker. And then finally, you can be someone who provides this awareness and signposting for people who are not even aware that this is a thing that they could have or be. So if you think that it's a possibility that your client may be neurodivergent by looking at those traits and experiences that I talked about, maybe you could open this possibility to them to consider. Let them know about those positive role models so that they don't reject it. Just hold that space open for them. So finally, the biggest thing is that, you know, there's so much untapped potential in us. All we need is someone to trust us, keep a safe space, encourage us to do what we naturally do well, and not worry too much about trying to fit in. So if we can increase collective consciousness about who we are and what we can do and how we can move humanity forward, wouldn't that be an amazing thing for everyone? How much happier, healthier, and abundant would the world be? So that's me, Kainan Techchandani. Thank you for listening, and thank you for helping me to share this inside world with your clients that may come to you one day. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kainan. I've got so much clarity, insight, and ideas from your session today. Thank you so much for sharing. Really, really appreciated. And there's some lovely comments and questions in the chat as well. So please do make sure you have a look at that. Folks, if you've got questions for Kainan, please do stick them in the Q&A. Make sure to put Kainan's name at the front so we know that the questions are for her. And we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker helps individuals navigate career-limiting challenges whilst creating environments for shared belonging. Having lived and worked in the US for 5 years and received a diversity and inclusion certificate from Cornell University, she now works with leaders on both sides of the Atlantic, helping organizations promote a response to today's business challenges that will create a more equal, sustainable future for all. So if you can welcome to our virtual stage, Ashana Crichton.
Thank you. It's so amazing to be here. I really appreciate that the Association for Coaching's put on to today's session for us, because I found it fascinating. I'm going to share some slides, if that's okay. Okay, so I'm a coach and facilitator in the DEI space, and today though is very different for me. It feels different because it's me doing the talking, it's me giving my point of view. And that feels really weird. So, because my approach to coaching is probably best illustrated by thinking about the parable of the blind man and the elephant. So through person-centered approaches and techniques, I encourage people to explore their own perspective, to share with others, no view being right or wrong. And together we get a more richer, more accurate feel for the reality of the world by sharing those differences. It's a neutral approach, and in its neutrality, I feel safe and open-minded. I dance with my clients as they explore their identities and navigate concepts that are new to all of us. This last few years has been a real learning. But I've also found this to be commonplace amongst my coaching peers, my colleagues, because from this position, it's not really necessary for us to impose our views on our clients. And it's why when asked to be part of this event to speak for 20 minutes of a subject of my choosing, I found it really difficult because I was forced to really think about what I had to say, what I wanted from this opportunity, and really what the opportunity was for the group, or is for the group. So this past year, maybe year and a half, there's been an increase in DEI CPD for coaches, and it's been wonderful to hear my colleagues being more aware, be more knowing about privilege, about how it shows up, the opportunities to become more diverse for us as a coaching industry, and also to make spaces for people that are from have more diverse backgrounds. So that's been wonderful, but I come from an advertising background, so I was in advertising before I became a coach. And I know that in order to really sell DEI, for it to be bought, we need to move past this broad awareness stage and really start engaging. And as coaches in this awareness stage, we're kind of wondering, what do we do with these pressing issues of the day? We're considering our viewpoints, our perspective on the world. Perhaps we're changing our communication slightly, or thinking whether we really use our consultant chops to make sure that we're delivering relevant content. But there's so much thought, but how do we move past that into action? It's a little bit hazy, and there are more questions than answers often, and there's certainly no manual theory or research that's going to help us be in this space as coaches. And my first ever advertising job was in an advertising agency called Ogilvy and Mather. And David Ogilvy was known for saying, "Give me the freedom of a tight brief." It's very simple. It's a very simple thought. It's the same thought that T.S. Eliot came through when he said, when forced to work within a strict framework, the imagination is taxed to its utmost and will produce its richest ideas. Given total freedom, the work is likely to sprawl. And this is what I've witnessed. We were taking in a lot of messages, a lot of things are being said, a lot of things are out there, and we're generally open to them. We're open to everything. And in many ways have created this paralysis by analysis for ourselves. So I hear a lot of coaches saying, you know, how do I attract diverse clients? Are people that are different to me really going to accept me as their coach? Others think that actually, because we're already exploring beliefs, values, people's life experience, actually perhaps that's enough. Or maybe you're someone that thinks it's not your place to use the coaching environment to advocate for your own beliefs. So today I wanted to use my voice to focus and inspire engagement past this broad awareness phase that I feel that we've been in. I want to feel active action, actual action. And ever the optimist, I seem to think I can do that in 15 minutes. So we'll see how we get on. But really, the way I wanted to work through this was by giving myself a really tight brief, a brief that I want to give to all of you. And that's to think about, how might we do good as a coach in a diverse world rather than avoid bad? So I stumbled upon this sentiment recently when looking at coach ethical practice. And if we're adhering to a philosophy of doing good rather than bad, that means doing good for good's sake. Now, I don't want to get caught up in the weeds of pro-social choice theory, but I also don't want to think that this is just a nod to the Hippocratic Oath, because for me, it's more than doing no harm or acting in the best interests of our client. Our ethics, our coach ethics, suggest that, or require us to embrace difference, to ensure an inclusive approach, and to challenge clients that are perceived to be using discriminatory behaviour. So when I think about this idea of doing good rather than avoiding bad, I'm also thinking about what Ibram X. Kendi said. Now, Ibram X. Kendi he's an author, he's a professor, he's an activist, and he's known for his work in the anti-racist movement. And he said that the opposite of racist isn't not racist. It's anti-racist. And that to me means that you don't get to do nothing, but still call yourself not racist. It suggests that colorblindness or not being a racist endorses hierarchies and norms that favor dominant groups. it suggests that to be passive is to perpetuate systems of injustice. And for me, this raises questions about coach neutrality. Now, Abraham X. Kendi is from the US, and I don't want us to put this aside thinking that that's a different beast altogether. So I wanted to make sure we kept our data points to the UK, to our island. What perhaps are we being neutral to? And here's lots of stats on the page, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did want to shed some, or I did want to draw attention to some of these. Because Black people are about 18 times more likely to be searched than their white counterparts. 1 in 8 trans people, 12%, have been physically attacked by customers or colleagues in the last year because of being trans. And 36% of over 50s felt that they'd been disadvantaged at work because of their age. Now, I'm not using today to talk about why these exist or what socioeconomic factors might be the cause, or even what institutional challenges we might point to. I just wanted to put them out there as facts, because these are the inequalities that our communities are working to address. And we don't have to attract these groups as clients to start doing the work to benefit them. And I'll shed a little bit more light on that. Equity. Equity is the recognition that each person has different circumstances, and therefore that resources and opportunity don't need to be allocated equally. They need to be allocated as needed in order to reach an equal outcome. So what that might look like in practice is hiring based on skill rather than using education as a prerequisite. It might be making sure entryways are fully accessible as a standard. Having benefits available for non-traditional couples, so thinking about parental leave rather than maternity leave, or embracing cultures and communities that aren't part of the dominant group. You know, it's why we use our pronouns and we put them on signatures, because we want to normalize some of that behavior rather than assuming. Now, these are all possibilities that the decision makers that we work with can make a reality. So I want to really put more emphasis on that, the decision makers we work with, because being an advocate doesn't mean having to rush out and have more diverse clients hire us. It means that we get to use our coaching from today to help our clients recognize when systems, processes, and norms need to be rethought to recognize those that might otherwise be marginalized. Coaching is a partnership, but I think we'd all agree that the process is one where the client often leads. In a session, we may in fact say very little. But when it's our responsibility to do good, perhaps it's complacent and risks collusion to not be more challenging in our approach. And I love the fact that Jenny mentioned being challenging. And that's something that I really want to put to the group, because really, I'm not trying to bury the lead here. We don't really have too much time. I'm recommending we do 2 things. And thing 1 is to use a flexible intervention approach as required. So that means really thinking about how you partner with your clients to challenge norms. And the second thing is to use contracting to transition from this stage of DEI awareness into more active engagement. And really, that's about managing expectations up front before a difficult situation arises that we don't know how to handle. So just to think a bit more about flexible intervention approaches, I'm thinking of Heron's 6 categories of intervention. And these really allow us to be adaptive in our approaches so that we can use them with clients and tailor our approach to the situation or the individual at hand. And when we look on the right-hand side, when we think about cathartic, catalytic, or supportive interventions, actually perhaps they feel more like the coaching we know. Perhaps we're comfortable with them. We feel like we're partnering with the client, holding them in unconditional positive regard. But actually, it's completely within our wheelhouse to be more authoritative when the need arises. So by leveraging these more authoritative interventions, what we're saying is we have license to point out, to be prescriptive when we hear something discriminatory or derogatory. We can provide information to our clients, data points, articles, so that they can reach a new perspective. They can find new ground for themselves. We can actually confront when perhaps a client's attitude isn't aligned with some of the behaviours that they expect to see from others or that they want to see from themselves. We can confront it. So an equitable coach knows when to move between these more person-centred facilitative approaches and actually stepping into more authoritative interventions that challenge the status quo. And what I would say is that these are the needs of today. This is what's required to make inclusion more than just a concept. And contracting is something that most of us are very familiar with. We're used to looking ahead, thinking forward about how we might make the nature of our arrangement clear, how we start building trust by safeguarding against potential ethical issues, thinking about conflicts of interest, thinking about needs to terminate. But how many of us are really making use of the contract to set expectations about how we'll coach, how we'll use our responsibility as citizens and conduct an equitable practice? Now, I'm suggesting that we use contracting to set ourselves up for DEI success. And that means having discussions upfront about the types of techniques we might use to collaborate, to challenge. So perhaps we're asking our clients how comfortable they're going to be by us challenging their perspectives at time in service of DEI. Because without really having these conversations about what a win-win relationship might look like, actually we could be contracting for collusion, and that would be a real risk. So I've kept it super simple because I do think it's within each of our knowledge and skills that we already have to pick this up right away, to start using more flexible intervention approaches as needed, and to use contracting to transition from DEI awareness into an active engagement. And what that requires us to do is really just to ask ourselves, what biases do we see at play for our clients? And when we're talking about those biases, it might be a bias that we see a client exhibit, or a bias that they seem to be working within, or perhaps from an organization point of view, what biases are at play? You can then ask yourself what inequalities you are in a position to affect. Again, those may be inequalities regarding an organization, gender pay gap, looking at representation within any organization, or it might be an inequality within society, within one of the communities that we serve, but really thinking ahead about that. And then think about your intervention approaches. Now, we all have go-tos, we all have norms, but how can we start leaning into new intervention approaches that serve the DEI work where we want to be doing? So that's really thought starters. And once you've got to a place, once you've answered those for yourselves, is really to then start using rigorous contracting to make your intent to do good clear. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Again, I'm just left with so many thoughts. As an external coach, I definitely, in this arena, I'm not doing good, I'm avoiding bad because I'm not sure how I contribute as an external member of external to the organisation, and just those questions and how to contract is just making me think about how I can actively do good. So I don't know where everybody else is at. There's some stuff coming through in the chat, so definitely have a look at that. But I certainly feel empowered and having that mirror held up that I can be doing more and I should be doing more. So I really thank you for that. But yeah, just brilliant. So do check out the chat. If you've got questions for Ashana, make sure you're getting them into the Q&A so that we can pose them at the end of the session today. And we will move on to our final speaker for this session. Our final speaker is an accomplished executive and internationally recognized inspirational leader. He's a best-selling author and a highly sought-after speaker, educator, and executive coach. He is currently president and CEO of Take the Limits Off, LLC, a senior leadership development and executive coaching firm based in Austin, Texas, which means that he is joining us from across the sea. I'm not sure what time of day it is there, and probably very early. So thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the stage, Mel Parker.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I'm glad to be here. And greetings from Austin, Texas. Let me share my screen. Where we get this going here. And then if someone could just verify that the screen is being shared.
All good.
Perfect. Like Charlotte said, Mel Parker, President and CEO of Take the Limits Off LLC. We're a leadership and executive coaching company, and we tend to focus on the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, and we tend to focus on senior leadership at the top of the house. And usually it's sort of the C-suite or C-suite -1. And the way that, I look at impact and why I think that's important is because I like to believe in gravity. And it's easier to push an idea or a boulder downhill than it is to defy gravity uphill. So our job is to change the minds at the top of the house and let that cascade down as much as possible and focus on that being able to make that engagement and that inclusivity requirement real within an organization. And so as we jump into this, I want to talk about, my leadership journey, because my journey in leadership has informed the way that I coach and informed the way that I interact. And my leadership journey started at the United States Military Academy at West Point, a school known for focus on leadership. And it continued through military service as an airborne ranger in the 82nd Airborne Division, where I had the opportunity to lead soldiers both in peacetime and in combat to help inform my leadership. And then I've had the opportunity to have senior leadership positions at some of the most, recognizable global brands on the planet, whether it's PepsiCo, Dell, Brinks, or Staples. And so all of this has informed my leadership concept, which boils down to a very simple thing. The answer to every question is always leadership. And anytime I approach an organization, an executive, I challenge them. I was like, if you can prove to me and provide me a question where the answer to that question, problem, or opportunity is not leadership, I owe you a cup of coffee. And not just a regular cup of coffee, I'm talking about an expensive, overpriced Starbucks cup of coffee. And to date, no one has presented a problem to me that was not solvable by leadership, whether it's growth, whether it's talent retention, whether it's creativity, everything is resolved by the power of leadership. And why that's important is because this is what we do. And the real thing that's going on right now, the Great Resignation is real and present. So the Great Resignation is real. 4.5 million people left their jobs in the US in November of 2021. There's an estimate that by the time the 21 tabulations are done, almost 47 million people in the US would have quit their jobs. So with all the executives that I talk to, the Great Resignation is one of the top 3 concerns that they have for this year and actually the next 2 years. And they're trying to respond to it. This year is going to see the largest annual pay increase in the US in decades, from a normal 2% to 5.7%. And they're doing this pay increase not to hold on to talent, they're doing it to retain the B players and professionals. They don't have an answer to hold on to top talent. US companies are losing top talent at a higher percentage than they are the people they consider professionals or B players, and it's having an outsized impact to the organization, to the teams. If a team is just on a bell curve with people from A players, B players, and C players, if you lose the proponent of your A players, it takes the whole gradient of the team down, and organizations and CEOs and executives are starting to see this manifest itself in results. And so what they found out is they're consistently losing the battle of the paycheck. Almost every time they're being outbid. I was on the phone with an executive yesterday where a person got offered an extra $100,000 to do the exact same job they're doing, and they can do it from home. and they can't win the battle of the paycheck. So what they've recognized is they have to win the battle of the hearts and minds of the organization. And that's where I think you come back to this answer, where inclusive leadership is the answer. And that's because of the Great Resignation. One of the top reasons, of the top 10 reasons that people are quitting: horrible bosses and horrible cultures. That's 70% of the reason that people leave. People think they leave because of the paycheck. That's the other 25, 26%, but 70% horrible bosses and horrible cultures. People don't leave jobs, they leave bad managers and bad cultures. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of people skills, and employees want to feel valued. They want to feel appreciated, and employees want to feel like they belong, which is music to our ears, because once again, we come back to Parker Principle number 2. The answer is always inclusive and engaged leadership. And there's a formula that I have for inclusive and engaged leadership that I talk to senior leaders and executives and organizations about. And this formula, once again, has never been proven wrong. If you can prove the formula wrong, another cup of coffee for you. Is engaged and inclusive leadership is a combination of IQ times CQ times EQ, where IQ is your intelligence quotient, CQ is your curiosity quotient, your desire to learn, and EQ, of course, is your emotional quotient, your emotional intelligence, how you understand and manage your own emotions and understand emotions of others, and use this information to determine your behaviors and your decision making. And so the great thing about this equation is it's a multiplication equation. So if you zero out in any of the equation, you zero out the whole equation. You can't be an inclusive, engaged leader if you don't have EQ and you're a 0 on EQ. You can't be one if you don't have CQ, intellectual curiosity. And the great thing about the multiplication equation is that it doesn't matter where you start out with your IQ, because everything under CQ and EQ are learnable skills that you can expand on as a leader. And when I roll this out to people, I'm a simple guy, and so I like to put things in terms that I can understand and that my clients can understand and execute to. And so I want to introduce you to something that I call cycle theory. And cycle theory is just like what it sounds. It's a bicycle. And so we throw out there, what's the purpose of the back wheel of a bicycle? And please feel free to throw it in the chat and throw it out there if you want to jump into it. Right. The purpose of the back wheel is to provide the power. It provides the propulsion that you need. And so as I overlay that equation, that's the IQ. And the IQ is all the power stuff. Your brain power, your formal education, it's your technical expertise, it's your functional expertise, and it's your past results and past performance. And so what's the purpose of the front wheel of a bicycle? Right, it's literally to give direction to the power. It's literally to harness the power wheel and make it go to work for you. And that is what for the equation is the CQ and the EQ. And it's everything else. It's the things that we used to call soft skills, that we used to think were the touchy-feely part of leadership, which are actually now the most important part of leadership. Character, emotional savvy, listening skills, belief, humility, integrity, resilience, empathy. These are the things that manage our power wheel. And now I used to ride here in Austin often, and when I used to ride, I used to have epic crashes. I mean, crashes where I was defying gravity and everything was up in the air. But not one time, not one single time did I crash because I made a mistake with my back wheel. And I can overlay that back to my career. Every single time that I had incredible success in my career, it was because the leaders that I enjoyed being around, that I was a part of, they had massive skills with their front wheel. And every time that there was failure, I could track it back to something that the leadership team or I didn't have on front wheel skills. And so that becomes important, because when it comes to finding organizational engagement, front wheel skills are the key to organizational engagement. It's those soft skills, those skills that you can learn and you can expand on. That's sort of our responsibility as coaches to help leaders tap into. And why organizational engagement is important is because it's the nirvana, it's the utopia, it's the Eden, whatever you want to think about it, of organizations. Because when you have organizational engagement, you have a team that's highly motivated, absorbed, and energetic about their work. They contribute more, they go beyond what's asked of them, they truly care about the business, and they voluntarily put in discretionary effort. And that's effort that we don't pay them for and effort we don't ask them for to achieve the goals of the team. And one of the things that I do at the top of the house is when CEOs and executives are trying to go, well, Mel, this is touchy and feely. How do I transition this to a P&L? How do I know how much money to spend on getting this organizational engagement? Well, there's data out there. Gallup has been monitoring this for decades, and they have very specific numbers on what happens when you have an engaged organization. All of your bad stuff gets less bad and your good stuff gets better. So the bad stuff, absenteeism goes down by 41%. And right now with turnover in a high turnover organization down by 24%. Turnover in a low turnover organization down by almost 60%. And then everything else, all the bad stuff gets better. Safety incidents, shrinkage, quality defects. And then all of your good stuff gets incredibly better. Your customer metrics, your profitability, your revenue, everything gets better. And so you can bake these numbers into a P&L, which can tell you what you can invest or how much you can invest in finding and creating this organizational engaged organization. Now, in order to have a organizational engagement, it can only be achieved through engaged and inclusive leaders. And there's a profile that I present out there of what that feels like and what that looks like. And organizations and HR organizations have sort of designed these surveys so people can figure out where they rate on this. So focus on values, character, and building trust. Where do you rate on this? 1 through 10, how do you rate as an executive? Where do you feel that you are? They have high emotional intelligence and intellectual curiosity. They have high self-awareness, which is just our calling to make people self-aware. They balance confidence with humility. They sponsor a culture of shared commitment and collaboration in relationships. They have an open door policy with a process for listening, analysis, and action. They get to know their people as individuals and understand their individual needs. They empower their people and prioritize their professional development and learning. They recognize the positive impacts of rewards and recognitions on performance, and they focus on something as simple as continuous improvement. And when people are engaged and when organizations are engaged and being able to deliver this, and when leaders hold themselves accountable to these simple things, we have seen in multiple iterations and scenarios where organizations that measure their engagement have seen 20 to 40% increases in their engagement, and they're able to track it back to teams' performance, that the teams with the highest engagement tend to produce the highest results. And so when it comes to investing, when it comes to looking at how we as coaches can impact DI&E or DE&I, it really is about changing the hearts and minds at the top of the organization. And the best way to do that is to show them why it's in their best interest, why it's profitable, why it's in their shareholders' best interest for them to invest in inclusive and engaged leaders to try to get to that nirvana of organizational engagement. And so I'll end with some final thoughts that, for me, the answer is always leadership. But for the world that we're living in now with the Great Resignation, the answer is actually inclusive and engaged leadership. Unleash your inclusive and engaged leadership through the leadership equation, IQ times CQ times EQ. Front wheel skills, the CQ and the EQ, the skills that we focus on as coaches. We don't really help people with their back wheel, their brain power, their education. Our whole world is the front wheel, and that's where we can help teams and organizations get closer and closer to that nirvana, to that Eden, to that utopia of getting organizational engagement. Organizational engagement requires inclusive and engaged leaders. And then I see it as our responsibility as executive coaches to be proponents of that, to have that impact at creating this methodology of creating almost a movement around the power of inclusive and engaged leaders in today's world, where people are leaving leaders in record numbers in the US. They're just saying they're just quitting, they're packing up, and they're not looking back. That right now, I think we have never been more important to success of our executives, to success of the organization than any time in recent history. Right now, what we do matters most, and I think organizations get better, organizations get more diverse, organizations get more inclusive when the leadership from the top down recognize that it's in everybody's best interest, from CEO to stakeholder, for an organization to be engaged, and an organization can only be engaged through inclusive and engaged leaders. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if I went over or not, but I'm here and I'm ready. I think we're going into Q&A. I appreciate you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mel. It's like the universe took all of the energy and passion and put it inside of you, which I'm just loving. Thank you so much. And there's lots of comments. I'm not alone in feeling this. So thank you so much. I'm loving the quotes. I'm loving the bicycle analogy. What is not to love? Yes, following your course. Off you go. Thank you so much. So Mel was the last of our fantastic speakers, and it's lovely because there's such a common thread between everybody, yet everyone's brought something very special and unique to each of the sessions and really been thought-provoking. So it's been phenomenal. We are going to move into the Q&A session. Lisa, are you there with the Q&A? And if I can invite all of our lovely speakers to take put their cameras on so that we can see you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Charlotte. You've just been amazing and your energy is wonderful.
I'm nothing. I bow down to Mel's energy, honestly. It's what I aspire to in life. Be prepared, people. I'm going to be bringing this to all of the future events that I'm supporting.
Very good. Well, we've had lots of engagement and some great questions here. So if it's okay, I'd like to start with Robin. So there's a question that had a lot of attention here. It seems that young people feel more drawn towards therapy than coaching. What's your take on that, Robin?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And can I just say very quickly, Mel, I feel like I'm hooked on whatever you have. I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, I saw that question, and I think for us, what we're finding in the UK schools, so we partner with schools in secondary and primary level in the UK, what we find is still quite a lot of young people don't actually know what coaching is, like actually just what is it and what is the benefit of it, while therapy obviously is just quite mainstream and it's kind of attention. So that in itself has, when we start to practice coaching with our kind of pilot schools, that in itself kind of attracts kind of young people to want to engage compared to therapy. I think the other thing to say is that in the UK, we are in a bit of a mental health crisis when it comes to children and young people. I think that's just a fact, not really an observation. And I think coaching does have a role to play, and obviously not in more kind of serious cases like Jenny mentioned. I think it's important we don't kind of blur boundaries between therapy and coaching, but I think in kind of low risk anxiety, coming back from COVID, when young people have really had a kind of lack of communication and lack of interaction with their friends, I think it's really tough going out there. So I think coaching, yeah, I don't think that quite answers the question, but I think coaching, yeah, definitely has a role to play. And I think it's not quite as well understood, I think, at school level as it should be.
And actually, I'll just follow on with that, if that's okay. Thank you, Robin. Do you also recruit young people and train them as coaches? Yeah, really good question. So we do, to an extent. So we train young people in coaching skills, and I think that there's an important distinction there. You know, we're not training people to, you know, become accredited coaches, although, you know, that'd be fantastic. We're training young people in how to listen effectively, how to ask questions, how to kind of hold space for other people so that they can have more kind of reflective kind of conversations with their peers. So one of the programs we run is a peer-to-peer program. So we train senior pupils in schools to work with younger pupils, that way kind of embedding a coaching culture in that school. And then also another program we do in partnership with the Academy of Executive Coaching, the AOEC, and those guys are incredible, is we train young professionals in coaching skills as well. Again, the idea of building a coaching culture from the kind of ground up, so that not that these guys will go on to
become full-time coaches, but more that they can have that kind of element of reflection and kind of thinking for themselves.
Brilliant. Gosh, it sounds really empowering. Amazing, Robin. Thank you so much. If I could go to Jenny, please. And I'll read out the question, and this also had a lot of attention. So I worked with women of color, working class, with a woman of color and working class coachee who felt angered in a group session when the session leader used the phrase, "the only barrier to progress is yourself." I mean, how can we balance the importance of mindset with a recognition of the very real barriers that these kinds of lived experiences and contexts can bring? Sorry, let me just, if we can.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think one that people struggle with. And actually, just on a very personal level, my daughter, I remember in her teen years, was very glass half full. And I'd say, "How was your day at school?" And I'd hear all of the terrible things that happened. And I'd be always thinking, well, what good happened? What did you do about it? And I took a step back and realized that we were never going to move forward unless I acknowledged where she was at. And I think that too often in organizations or in our relationships, what we want to do is we're trying to move someone forward from their position without acknowledging what they experience. And so I think it would be, in that situation, they are angered because you're not acknowledging my situation before asking me to build all my resources and move forward from it. The other thing that I think is quite key in that is to acknowledge that we may all have troubles. So, if you're a white man, you may have challenges. You may have had challenges in your life growing up. The situation is not saying only Black women have challenges or whoever has challenges, but to recognize is that your challenges may be different. And I think that is key. I have levels of advantage, speaking English, being brought up in the UK, a level of education. I acknowledge what my advantages are. I will never have issues because of my sexual orientation, because I'm a heterosexual woman, or have issues because of my disability at this point, because I don't have a disability. And I think that, again, it's that acknowledgement. I have, knowing what you have, and using that power with humility, and acknowledging that some people won't have the same situation as yourself. So in that, for me, it's about the acknowledgement of what your advantage, of how you can use it, acknowledge that someone else might not have that advantage, even though they may have some advantages. And absolutely, we can make a difference in our lives, but recognizing the person's starting point is really key, because someone else's starting point might be here and mine might be here. And absolutely, I can do more for my life, but it's going to be harder. And there are going to be challenges to overcome. And I think it's that acknowledgement piece that is key.
And I saw lots of pop-ups in the chat saying, yeah, acknowledgement's it. And it's really well put. So thank you. Thank you so much for that, Jenny. I would like to acknowledge that Kanan has very kindly answered lots of her questions already in the chat. So if you had any, wanted to follow up on anything that Kanan answered, it's in the Q&As under answered. So with that, I'll go to a question for Ashana, please.
Hello.
So could we pop up Ashana? There we go. Hi, thank you so much. So the question that's come up and that was very popular was, how would you advise coaching frustrations associated with being an ambitious Black female faced with a white male dominated organization? So it can feel like, the individual actions alone are not enough. So when the client's saying they can't fight or come up with ways to battle the statistics, how can we help?
I think that's a very similar question actually to the one that Jane just answered. Yeah,
it is.
So I'm going to say something very similar but in a different way.
Okay.
But I agree in it's acknowledging the real barriers and not always thinking that they're perceived barriers. So often we have this bias for action in coaching where it's, how can we reframe that into something more positive? Or how can we think about that in a different, more empowering way? And I think there are real barriers. And, as much as I was saying in my talk to ask people to really think about some of those more authoritative intervention styles, I think it's also knowing when you might go into more facilitative, cathartic approaches that sits with somebody in that reality and acknowledges perhaps the pain that they're in, what their reality does look like for them. But then you can also offer information. So for example, we know that for Black women, it's really important that we have mentors, that we have sponsors, that we have that visibility within an organization. So that might mean stretch projects or different assignments or initiatives we're part of. That's the informational piece. But I think between the, really being there for somebody and being, providing information that can help people surpass some of those barriers, we're probably in a good shape. But that was also why I thought it was important today to acknowledge that it's not always helping the person to get out of the hole that they're in. Actually, if we're working with leaders within organizations, it's understanding that our conversations with them are incredibly important and help turn the dial in this way.
That has been a common theme throughout this, isn't it? We really need to work with the leaders to change the mindsets and the approaches and the understanding. So yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. If I could turn to Mel, again, there was the leadership theme here. So one of the most popular questions is where is all this talent moving to? So are they going to different jobs, retiring? They're kind of like disappearing off the scene. I think we're seeing that here too. If you could give a little bit of insight there.
Yeah, a lot of them are moving to different jobs. A lot of them are becoming entrepreneurs. Or a lot of them are deciding, we've had people that leave that don't have a plan and just say, life is too short to be miserable at work. I will find something else. And they're deciding that they're going to make different decisions. But the job change, the people moving and upgrading jobs is the preponderance of it, that people are getting, it's a shortage and people are, they're being outbid. It used to be for 2 decades an employer's market where minimum raises, all these restructures, employers who had the power. That dynamic has completely shifted in the US, and employers are scrambling to keep top talent. They are scrambling. They are being outbid by counteroffers. Counteroffers are not working. And so the people are, it's like a supply and demand. And so companies are actively recruiting and stealing talent from other companies, and people are leaving when they don't feel like they can get their dreams met or their needs met at their current job or current organization.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for shedding some light on that. And there were lots of comments about your energy, both in the Q&A and in the chat. So I think if you've got any secrets you would like to share with us on how to have that kind of energy.
Happy to be alive. Every day is a good day. So, I start the day with 20 minutes of gratitude, and then it's downhill from there. So that's where I start.
Superb. I think we've pretty much gotten close to time here. Robin, quite a few people have also asked how they can support your charity, or how can schools get in contact with you. So maybe pop that up in the chat for us, Robin. That would be fab. Thank you.
Lisa, we've got about 10 minutes, I think, left.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, fantastic. Well, we still certainly have more questions. So Mel, since we've got you up still, let me go to another one of your questions. So what sources, no, sorry, that was another one. So sometimes I work with middle managers who feel stuck between the desire to invest and lead their employees versus the business objectives that, is more profit driven. I mean, you kind of touched on that a bit. So what people would like to know is, what approach do you think middle management could take to influence the organization? So we talked a lot about that top tier, but what can the middle management do?
Absolutely. And so you can basically take the same concept of, at middle management, you have a responsibility, you have a scope and scale that you're responsible for, and you can go pull the numbers that if your team was engaged and you had your team and you were having attrition and you cut attrition down, or you increase profitability, or you reduce safety defects or product defects, or whatever your responsibility is, by some percentage amount, if you can invest in getting your leaders trained, getting your leaders skills training and listening and empathy and courage, that you need to present that as numbers. You know, the best argument is figure out how to P&L relevant any argument that you have to make, and then you make that argument upstream. And then part of what I roll out to the organizations is some organizations try to make change and educate at the bottom or educate in the middle without simultaneously training the top. And so the middle managers come back with languages and things that are different. They're like, we're looking at equity, we're looking at diversity, we're looking at doing this engagement. And if the senior leaders haven't been trained in the same language, they just beat it out of the middle managers. And so you literally have to simultaneously train everybody to talk the same language. And when you're talking the same language and you're acknowledging the same data, you can make good presentations and good arguments to invest in training.
Excellent, thank you. Clean, and I know you've answered a lot of the questions, but if I could pose one to you live, that would be great. So some more have come up. So as coaches, what would you recommend? Maybe some sources or something, so we can start becoming more aware and educated, and not overstepping and not saying things maybe we shouldn't. So maybe just a little bit more on how we can learn more and still keep ourselves and the clients.
There's so much out there, right? Because it's so diverse. But in terms of autism, I actually think it's better to listen to the people that are advocating for themselves. And there's a guy called, he's got a YouTube video called Asperger's from the Inside. And I think that's wonderful because he speaks about so many things in terms of aspects of living and the experience as an autistic. With ADHD, I really loved using Attitude magazine, which is online. They have tons of articles on there. And it's about work, family, kids, adults, so much in there. And they do regular webinars, so you can keep up to date. And if you want to learn more, you can sign up for those. Giftedness, Unleash Mondays is a great podcast. And there's a really great book called My Rainforest Mind by Paula Prober. So I think those three, I'm not I don't really work with people with dyslexia, so I'm not going to recommend anything on there, but those three areas I would say are really good starting points.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I've got a couple of questions that were kind of across the panel, so I'll invite you to answer if you like. So, and I think this is really pertinent. We've got somebody who's asked, are we automatically going to be better coaches to those who have similar characteristics or that we can identify with, or that have similar, gender or sexual orientation? So I'd invite the panel to offer up some thoughts.
I'm happy to share.
Thank you, Ashana.
I think it's interesting because so for example, when you first become a coach, perhaps you think that if you coach people that are from the profession you were in previously, that it will be better, it will be easier, there'll be more synergy. And sometimes you find that actually you're just too close to the subject. You find it hard to hold the coaching space because you're there, because you want to answer the questions. And I think there is that piece when it comes to coaching somebody that isn't from the same identity or background as us, that there can actually be a merit in there being that difference. So you do hold your spaces. However, that's not to say that a lot of Black women I coach really, really find it refreshing to have me the other side of that relationship. They know that there will be certain things we can talk about, certain things I won't be concerned about stepping over in the wrong way. And of course, there is that amount that you can relax. So I would say, there are pros and cons.
Excellent, thank you. Would anybody else like to add to Ashana's really helpful comments?
Yeah, I would agree. And it really depends on the situation. My dynamic is across, probably 50% of the people that I coach are female. Probably only 25% are Black or brown or diverse, because I try to make leadership and engage leadership a universal language. And I need to be able to convince white males. I need to be able to convince white females, Black females, Black males of the importance of relationships, of the importance of trust. And I think as long as you can create that trust relationship, like Ashana said, it may be shared experiences, it may be shared understanding, that you can create what you need as a coach and create that trust across anything. And it's also industry agnostic. I coach people at Universal Music Group and people at Morgan Stanley, and these cultures are the anti-cultures of each other. But people leadership is really all about people, and these leaders want to figure out how to unlock and tap into the best part of the people that they lead, and they want to have an impact.
Can I add?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so just building on both points that were made, I think that there can be a very deliberate action to encourage difference in terms of your coaches. So if at the top of the organization, there is a very similar group, it would, and you can't, that pipeline of leaders isn't coming through, and you're wondering how to get that diversity of thought and experience and perspective into that boardroom, having coaches from different backgrounds could be a way to do that. So I think you can be very intentional about the difference. I completely agree with Ashana's point that it's really about the chemistry, and it's not necessarily the case just because you have a similar background on the face of it that it will make a difference. However, there was some Deloitte research which talked about the fact that 60% of us are covering in the workplace. We hide bits of ourselves to be able to assimilate and fit in with others. And I think if you see someone who may look like you, if you're one of those people who feels you have to cover, and the thing that you feel that you have to cover, you have something in common with the person who's coaching you, I think immediately you let go of that. You let go of that. I don't have to hide who I am. It's not a substitute for the chemistry we need to build and the correct relationship and the way we coach. But I think it can immediately mean that we I don't have to wear this anymore in this space because the person automatically is going to get it. So yeah, that's my perspective on it.
Roman, would you be coming in on that one as well? Again, just being, neurodiverse, does that make a difference as a coach?
Personally, I think it does make a big difference because our experiences are so personal, unique. And if someone hasn't gone through it, it's difficult for that person to empathize deeply. We're so used to masking and hiding. So that to give someone that sense of safety to take off the mask after decades, it can be really hard if you're not someone who's been there. That's not to say that if you haven't got the right energy, I guess, of safeness and openness and curiosity, that the connection doesn't happen. But so many people I've worked with have said they've been probably more counselling than coaching, therapy. They've done it for years and they just didn't feel understood. And if you don't feel understood, you can't open up. So I think there is an element of needing to have had that experience, or it helps. It might not be necessary, but it definitely helps.
Okay, that's extremely helpful. I think now we are at time.
We are absolutely at time, Lisa. Thank you for running a great Q&A session. Thank you to all of our panelists for getting in there and answering the questions. It has been an absolute joy to sit in and be part of this session. So thank you so much to all of you for your wisdom, your insight, your sharing, your honesty, and all of that extra energy from Mel as well, which I think has just bolstered everybody. So thank you, everyone. If you're joining us for the next session, don't forget it's a different link. So make sure that you're in there with the different link. Please do shout about the session, what the insights have been, share them far and wide so that we engage, inspire, and motivate positive change out there within our networks as well. And thank you once again for being here, for contributing and getting engaged. So we'll see you all soon.